There is a kind of power that very few people truly understand. It does not belong to those who always occupy the center of every conversation, nor to those who appear everywhere or are always ready to offer opinions. It is the power of those who know when to step back, long enough to listen to the voice that most people spend their entire lives ignoring, the voice within themselves. Have you noticed this? The more you try to explain yourself to the world, the more exhausted you feel. The harder you work to prove you are right, that you are worthy, the more estranged you become from your true self. But the moment you stop justifying yourself, stop seeking external validation, something begins to shift. Everything gradually becomes clearer. The world teaches us the opposite. You must speak up if you want to be heard. You must show up if you want to be acknowledged. You must perform if you want to be noticed. And yet, precisely when you stop trying to impress, precisely when you turn inward instead of chasing the outside world, life moves in an entirely different direction. Carl Jung, the legendary Swiss psychologist, spent his entire life exploring the deepest and most mysterious layers of the human soul. He recognized that most people are not stuck because they lack knowledge or opportunity. They are stuck because they are constantly running away from themselves, every single day, without even realizing it. Unnecessary conversations, hours of mindless scrolling, the compulsion to explain every decision. All of these can sometimes be sophisticated forms of avoidance, helping us escape confronting what lies deep within. Jung discovered that every person constructs a persona, a social mask. That mask forms very early. Sensitivity is seen as weakness, and so it is hidden. Anger is considered dangerous, and so it is suppressed. Different desires are judged, and so they are concealed. Over the years, that mask becomes so familiar that we forget it is only a role. Many people live inside that role their entire lives, without realizing they lost connection with their true selves long ago. Beneath that mask lies what Jung called the shadow, a place that holds the rejected parts, unacknowledged fears, unhealed wounds, suppressed anger, denied ambitions. And the shadow does not disappear simply because you ignore it. It continues to grow in silence, appearing as overreactions, inexplicable outbursts, and recurring patterns you cannot understand. According to Jung, most of what makes us uncomfortable in others is actually a mirror reflecting the unacknowledged parts of ourselves. That is why noise becomes dangerous. Not just the noise of sound, but the noise of a life in constant busyness. The endless stream of information, the never-ending conversations, the prolonged distractions. All of this can become a tool for avoiding the most important encounter of our lives, the encounter with ourselves. When you truly stop, you realize silence is not emptiness. It is where awareness is born. Withdrawal is not escape. It is the process of returning to yourself. And focusing on yourself is not selfishness. It is the act of reclaiming the parts that have been lost in the roles, expectations, and wounds of the past. Jung called this journey individuation, the path toward wholeness. A reconciliation between light and shadow, between the person you present to the outside world and the true person who exists within. He did not merely study this journey, he lived it. After parting ways with Freud, he withdrew from public life for many years to explore his own inner world. From the outside, it looked like a retreat, but from the inside, it was the most creative and transformative period of his life. He once wrote, "Solitude is the source of healing that makes my life worth living." And, "The greatest privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." In this video, we will explore together the three profound powers that Jung saw in silence, in necessary withdrawal, and in the ability to return to oneself, not as passing life tips, but as doorways to genuine transformation. Because when you choose authenticity over performance, When you choose to face your inner world instead of chasing external validation, you are stepping onto the most difficult path, and also the path most capable of changing your life. Part 1. The most terrifying moment is when you realize you have never lived as yourself. Let us begin with a question that most people avoid. When you talk to others, when you post a status update, when you walk into a room full of people and immediately adjust your behavior, who is showing up? Your true self, or the version of yourself you believe the world will more easily accept? If you look closely, most of our lives are built on constant adjustments. We learn to say the right things, to hide the emotions that might invite judgment, to display the praised qualities and quietly put away the rest. Over time, this becomes so habitual that we no longer notice we are doing it. Carl Jung called this social shell the persona. No one consciously creates it. It forms through countless small experiences we usually forget. A child who cries and is told to be stronger, who gets angry and is labeled disrespectful, who speaks honestly and is mocked. Each time, the tender soul learns a very simple lesson. Some parts of me are not welcome. And so those parts are gradually moved into the shadows, not destroyed, just no longer allowed to appear. Jung did not believe the persona needed to be eliminated. Society cannot function if everyone expresses every thought in every situation. The persona has its role. The problem arises when we forget that it is only a tool, because a tool, used for too long, can very easily become a prison. At first, you use the mask to adapt to the world. Then the mask begins to dictate who you must become. From that moment, life is no longer an experience. It becomes an extended performance. And that performance consumes an enormous amount of energy. You think more about how you are perceived than about how you truly feel. You care more about image than truth. You protect reputation more than you protect the peace within your soul. Perhaps that is why so many people wake up each morning feeling exhausted without understanding why. Not because they have worked too hard, but because they have spent too much time becoming someone else. Think about the times you felt the need to explain yourself, explaining why you made that choice, why you changed, why you are no longer the same as before. Behind all those explanations, there is usually a quiet fear, the fear that your image in others' eyes might be shaken. That is the moment the persona is trying to protect itself. But the most frightening thing is not that we wear masks. The frightening thing is that we forget we are wearing them. When that happens, the true self is pushed further and further away. Genuine desires are ignored. Real emotions are suppressed. The voice inside is silenced. And then one day, the question arrives. Why have I done everything right and still don't feel happy? Jung believed the answer usually begins with something very simple: silence. Only in silence does the mask begin to lose its power. When you stop reacting immediately, no longer feel compelled to prove anything, allow yourself to sit with emotions that have never been named, a new space begins to open. And in that space, you realize most of the pressure you carry does not come from the world. It comes from the relentless struggle to maintain a version of yourself that you believe you must become. The truly grounded person is not someone who always has the answers, nor someone who wins every argument. It is the person calm enough not to be pulled away by the need to prove their own worth, someone no longer controlled by the fear of being judged. And from that stillness, a very different kind of strength begins to form. Not the strength of controlling others, but the strength of no longer having to run away from yourself. Part 1. The most terrifying moment is when you realize you have never lived as yourself. Let us begin with a question that most people avoid. When you talk to others, when you post a status update, when you walk into a room full of people and immediately adjust your behavior, who is showing up? Your true self, or the version of yourself you believe the world will more easily accept? If you look closely, Most of our lives are built on constant adjustments. We learn to say the right things, to hide the emotions that might invite judgment, to display the praised qualities and quietly put away the rest. Over time, this becomes so habitual that we no longer notice we are doing it. Carl Jung called this social shell the persona. No one consciously creates it. It forms through countless small experiences we usually forget. A child who cries and is told to be stronger, who gets angry and is labeled disrespectful, who speaks honestly and is mocked. Each time, the tender soul learns a very simple lesson. Some parts of me are not welcome. And so those parts are gradually moved into the shadows, not destroyed, just no longer allowed to appear. Jung did not believe the persona needed to be eliminated. Society cannot function if everyone expresses every thought in every situation. The persona has its role. The problem arises when we forget that it is only a tool, because a tool, used for too long, can very easily become a prison. At first, you use the mask to adapt to the world. Then the mask begins to dictate who you must become. From that moment, life is no longer an experience. It becomes an extended performance. And that performance consumes an enormous amount of energy. You think more about how you are perceived than about how you truly feel. You care more about image than truth. You protect reputation more than you protect the peace within your soul. Perhaps that is why so many people wake up each morning feeling exhausted without understanding why. Not because they have worked too hard, but because they have spent too much time becoming someone else. Think about the times you felt the need to explain yourself, explaining why you made that choice, why you changed, why you are no longer the same as before. Behind all those explanations, there is usually a quiet fear, the fear that your image in others' eyes might be shaken. That is the moment the persona is trying to protect itself. But the most frightening thing is not that we wear masks. The frightening thing is that we forget we are wearing them. When that happens, the true self is pushed further and further away. Genuine desires are ignored. Real emotions are suppressed. The voice inside is silenced. And then one day, the question arrives. Why have I done everything right and still don't feel happy? Jung believed the answer usually begins with something very simple: silence. Only in silence does the mask begin to lose its power. When you stop reacting immediately, no longer feel compelled to prove anything, allow yourself to sit with emotions that have never been named, a new space begins to open. And in that space, you realize most of the pressure you carry does not come from the world. It comes from the relentless struggle to maintain a version of yourself that you believe you must become. The truly grounded person is not someone who always has the answers, nor someone who wins every argument. It is the person calm enough not to be pulled away by the need to prove their own worth, someone no longer controlled by the fear of being judged. And from that stillness, a very different kind of strength begins to form. Not the strength of controlling others, but the strength of no longer having to run away from yourself. Part 2. The doors within you that have never been opened. If the mask is the part the world sees, then there exists another part beneath it, rarely spoken of, often locked away, and the part that many people spend their entire lives running from. Carl Jung called that part the shadow. The moment people hear this word, many imagine something negative or frightening. But Jung did not use the concept in a moral sense. He was not speaking of evil. He was speaking of the rejected parts of who you are. The anger you always pretend you don't have. The hurt you conceal behind a facade of strength. The envy you cover with polite congratulations. The desire for recognition you disguise as humility. The fear of failure you call by the gentler name of caution. Every human being possesses parts like these. The problem does not lie in their existence. It lies in our refusal to acknowledge that they exist. What is denied does not disappear. It simply moves into the shadows. and from there begins to govern our lives from behind the curtain. Consider someone who always insists they are a calm person, rarely losing their temper, rarely arguing, always appearing composed. Then one day, over something trivial, they explode with such intensity that even they cannot understand what is happening. That is not a sudden loss of control. It is the result of years of suppressed emotion finally finding a way out. What is buried always finds a way back. But what makes the shadow so subtle is not merely those explosions. More striking is the way it surfaces in everyday reactions we consider perfectly normal. Jung called this phenomenon projection, when you see in others what you are not yet ready to see in yourself. Someone irritates you in a way that feels disproportionate. A behavior provokes a reaction far stronger than the situation warrants. On the surface, it all seems to concern the other person, but often, the real story is unfolding inside you. The person who constantly criticizes others' confidence may be concealing their own insecurity. The person who looks down on those who dare to pursue ambition may have abandoned their own dreams long ago. Jung believed that most human suffering does not come from the shadow itself, but from the prolonged war waged against it. Imagine trying to hold a ball underwater. For the first few seconds, it is not too difficult. But the longer you hold it down, the more strength it demands. Your arm begins to ache, your body tenses, and your entire attention is consumed simply by keeping the ball from rising to the surface. The human psyche operates in much the same way. Every denied emotion, every buried pain, every rejected part of the self requires energy to keep suppressed. We often believe we are exhausted from work or external pressures, but sometimes the deeper source lies in the silent war being waged within. The person who has spent years proving their strength may be consuming all their energy simply to avoid feeling vulnerability. The person who always appears positive may be utterly drained from constantly pushing back grief that has never been resolved. That is why moments of honest self-reckoning so often bring a strange and unexpected sense of relief. Not because the problem disappears, but because you have finally stopped fighting against reality. Stopped trying to be a perfect version of yourself that does not exist. Stopped demanding that you always be strong, always be right, always be in control of everything. And in that acceptance, a new kind of freedom begins to emerge. Jung observed that the most mature individuals are not those who have no shadow, but those who are acutely aware of it. They know they are capable of anger, capable of selfishness, that they carry their own fears and their own weaknesses. But precisely because they can see these things, they are no longer unconsciously controlled by them. That is the difference between a person swept away by a storm and a person who knows the storm exists within them. And that is also the greatest gift that silence offers. Silence does not make the shadow disappear. It gives the shadow the chance to speak. Not to destroy you, but to be heard. Because sometimes what is ruining your life is not what lies in the shadow, but the fact that you have spent too many years pretending it isn't there. That is why Jung believed that the things which provoke the strongest reactions in you are often mirrors, not reflecting other people, but reflecting the unrecognized parts within yourself. And it is precisely for this reason that the noise of modern life becomes the perfect hiding place. As long as you stay constantly busy, you will never have to look inward. The phone always lit up, the earphones always playing, the schedule always full. You will never have to sit quietly with yourself. Many people fear solitude not because they dislike being alone. They fear what surfaces when no one else is there. An old memory that suddenly returns. A wound not yet healed that unexpectedly aches. A question deferred for years that abruptly appears. And most of us react the same way, immediately reaching for a distraction, filling the void, doing anything rather than facing what is rising up. But Jung saw those very moments as doorways. He believed that true psychological maturity does not begin when you learn something new, but when you find the courage to see what you have always avoided. Only when an emotion is called by its right name does it lose its invisible power. Only when a fear is acknowledged does it cease to control you from the dark. Only when a wound is recognized does it have the chance to heal. This is the deepest paradox of the inner journey. The more honest you are about your own imperfect parts, the freer you become. Not because the shadow disappears, but because you no longer have to spend your energy hiding it. The person who understands their own anger is rarely governed by it. The person who is aware of their own fear is rarely manipulated by it. The person who knows they can be weak is often the strongest of all, because they no longer have to live in perpetual battle to prove otherwise. Confronting the shadow does not mean drowning in negativity or blaming yourself. It is the act of bringing the separated parts back into the whole, a shift from fragmentation to wholeness. Because in the end, the goal is not to become a perfect human being. The goal is to become an authentic one. And the path toward that authenticity always begins with the same thing: the courage to look at what you have spent too many years avoiding. Part 3. Why you are always exhausted without knowing why. There is a truth that many people only come to recognize after years of exhaustion. You are not tired because life is too heavy. You are tired because too many parts of yourself are being pulled in different directions at the same time. Your body sits in this room, but your mind is still caught in an argument from last week. One part of you is anxious about the future. Another part remains trapped in an old memory that was never truly closed. Jung observed that psychological energy operates very much like sunlight. When scattered, it produces only gentle warmth. But when focused through a lens, it can set an entire object ablaze. Human beings are no different. When inner energy is dispersed across hundreds of different concerns, its power nearly vanishes. But when concentrated, it becomes the driving force of transformation. The problem is that most of us were never taught how to protect our own energy. We were taught to be helpful, to be present, to be ready to assist, to be the kind of person others can rely on. None of that is wrong, but without boundaries, kindness can very easily become depletion. Many people spend their entire lives in the role of the problem solver, listening to everyone, worrying about everyone, carrying everyone else's emotions, yet rarely pausing to ask themselves, "And what about me?" Not because they have no feelings of their own, but because they have grown so accustomed to placing others' emotions first for so long. They know what their loved ones are grieving over, what their friends are anxious about. But when they turn inward, they find only a vague and formless emptiness. Jung believed this to be one of the deepest root causes of modern disorientation. When a person continuously directs all of their energy outward, they gradually lose their inner center, and a person without a center will be pulled along by whatever appears in front of them. A word of praise can lift them up. A criticism can bring them down. A rejection can cause them to question their entire sense of worth. Not because they are weak, but because their energy is no longer in their own hands. That is why Jung regarded the act of returning to oneself not as something selfish, but as something essential to genuine maturity. You cannot live other people's lives for them. You cannot carry the entire world on your shoulders and still preserve your own peace. At some point, you must learn to give back what does not belong to you, to return the responsibilities, the expectations, the battles you were never born to fight. And the strange thing is that when you do so, the first thing that returns is not emptiness, but clarity. Things that once confused you begin to make more sense. Decisions that once felt impossible begin to feel simpler. Not because the world has changed, but because your energy has stopped being scattered. Jung placed particular emphasis on one insight. Attention is where energy is being invested. Every day, people spend hours worrying about futures that do not yet exist, comparing themselves to carefully curated images on screens, replaying conversations that ended months ago. Each time this happens, energy continues to be drawn away, quietly, continuously, until all that remains inside is an inexplicable sense of emptiness. The principle Jung identified is straightforward. Whatever receives your attention grows. Whatever loses your attention weakens. Give energy to fear, and fear expands. Give energy to understanding, and understanding deepens. This is not positive thinking. This is simply how the human mind operates. When you begin to withdraw your attention from the things that are draining you and redirect it toward understanding yourself, a quiet shift begins to take place. People who once held power over your emotions gradually lose their influence. Fears that once governed your decisions begin to shrink, and the voices of the outside world no longer drown out the voice within. That is the moment your energy returns to its true owner, and also the moment you feel, for the first time, what it means to live from your own center, rather than from the pull of the world around you. Part 4. Where the meeting with yourself begins. By this point, you have perhaps come to realize that silence does more than simply calm you, that withdrawal does more than simply offer rest, and that turning your focus inward is more than merely a way to recover your energy. Those are only the outermost layers. Hidden beneath them lies something far more significant, a journey that Jung regarded as the greatest task of a human life. He called it individuation. Most people spend their lives trying to become someone, the version their family hopes for, the version society approves of, or the version that makes them feel safe. But very few ever ask a different question. If I stripped away all of those expectations, who would I actually be? That is precisely where the journey of individuation begins, not by adding more, but by removing the outdated roles, the borrowed beliefs, the images you have spent years trying to maintain, until what remains is not the person you thought you were supposed to become, but the person you already, at your core, are. This is not a comfortable process. Every layer of the mask that is lifted brings with it a part of the ego that feels threatened. Every truth that is seen demands the surrender of some illusion. Jung recognized that beneath the fears and the buried memories, there exists a deeper source of wisdom, a part of the soul that is always trying to guide us toward maturity, always seeking to bring us back to a state of wholeness. But that voice is very quiet. It does not shout. It does not compete with the noise of the outside world. It appears only in those moments when the mind is still enough to listen. That is why so many people never hear it. Amid the news, the social media, the notifications, and the endless noise, the deep inner voice is almost entirely drowned out. But when true stillness arrives, something begins to shift. Old memories reconnect with one another. Experiences that once seemed unrelated begin to carry new meaning. You start to see the patterns that have repeated themselves throughout your life, why you are always drawn to a certain kind of person, why the same fears keep returning, why the same lessons keep appearing in different forms. This is not magic. It is the unconscious gradually stepping into the light of awareness. And when that happens, a particular feeling emerges. Not happiness in the ordinary sense, not excitement, but a feeling of rightness. The feeling that at last your life is moving in a direction that truly belongs to you. That is the greatest gift of the inward journey. Not perfection, not superiority, but wholeness. Part 5. When you become yourself, life begins to respond differently. There is an experience you have likely had before, even if you never knew what to call it. During the periods when your mind is chaotic, when you overthink, react too quickly, and get drawn into every minor conflict, life itself seems to grow disorderly and kind. Work does not go smoothly. Relationships become strained. Every decision feels difficult. But during other periods, when you are calmer, less reactive, less pulled into the noise around you, a strange feeling emerges. Opportunities appear at exactly the right moment. You meet the right person at precisely the right time. Things that once seemed complicated suddenly become simple. Not because the world has changed, but because the way you engage with the world has changed. Jung called this phenomenon synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that arise when a person is living in greater harmony with their deeper self. Not magic, not luck, but the natural reflection between one's inner state and what begins to appear in one's outer life. Consider the image of a mirror. When its surface is covered in dust, every reflection is distorted and unclear. When the dust is wiped away, the image becomes sharp. The mind operates in much the same way. When dominated by distraction, noise, and unconscious reactions, what you experience also becomes chaotic and distorted. When you grow still and focused, you are wiping clean the mirror of your inner world, and what is reflected through it becomes clearer as well. But Jung always emphasized one crucial point. You cannot fake this. You cannot project an outward appearance of calm while remaining in turmoil within. You cannot repeat positive affirmations and expect them to substitute for genuine inner work. You cannot post perfect images on social media and call that personal growth. The deeper layers of the psyche, the unconscious, always sense your true state. And it is that state, not your surface presentation, that determines how life responds to you. Other people may be convinced by appearances for a time, but life itself is not. This is an uncomfortable truth. When life feels chaotic and uncontrollable, the problem rarely lies in the outside world. It is most often a signal that you have drifted from your own center, and in those moments, the solution is not to seek more information, more strategies, or more advice from external sources. The solution is usually far simpler and far more demanding. Stop, become still, and come back to focus. The person who emerges from a period of genuine inward work becomes different in a way that is difficult to describe, but easy to sense. There is a steadiness in them, not rigidity, but rootedness, a stability that does not require external validation in order to hold. They do not need to fill silence. They do not need to win every argument. They do not need to be seen in order to know their own worth. And paradoxically, precisely because they do not need these things, they carry greater influence. Relationships change as well, not because the people around them have changed, but because they have stopped using those people as screens onto which their own unresolved inner dramas are projected. They begin to see others more clearly, as separate individuals with their own inner lives, their own shadows, their own journeys. From that clarity comes a rare quality of presence. They stop reacting and begin responding. They stop performing and begin truly listening. Those worth keeping draw closer. Those who were only there for the performance quietly drift away. Work becomes more distinctive because it no longer originates from the anxiety of wanting to be accepted, but from something genuinely within. Decisions become cleaner because they are no longer calibrated to others' approval, but to one's own actual values. In the relationship with oneself, perhaps for the very first time, becomes genuinely kind. Not the performed kindness of affirmations and gratitude journals, but the kindness that comes from knowing yourself well enough to treat yourself with honesty. If there is one single truth that Carl Jung most wanted us to understand, it is perhaps this. The greatest battle of a human life does not take place out there. It takes place within. Not between you and the world, not between you and other people, but between the person you present to the world and the person you truly are. Throughout this video, we have explored together the power of silence, the value of necessary withdrawal, and the meaning of returning to oneself. Not to escape from life, but to reunite with the most authentic part of who you are. the part that was forgotten somewhere amid the expectations, the roles, and the relentless noise of the modern world. Jung once believed that the greatest privilege a human being can have is to become the person they truly are. But that does not happen on its own. It requires the courage to look honestly at your own imperfect parts. It requires the patience to walk through periods of solitude. And it requires the honesty to let go of the masks that no longer serve your growth. Perhaps when this video ends, your outer life will not change immediately. But if even one idea from what we have shared today causes you to pause and look a little more deeply within yourself, then that journey has already begun. Because every true transformation begins with awareness, and every true freedom begins with knowing yourself. Thank you for taking the time to stay with me until these final moments. If this video has offered you a perspective worth keeping, please consider hitting like and subscribing to the channel to continue this journey with us, exploring the psychology of Carl Jung, inner development, and the mysterious depths of the human soul. I would also love to know which idea stayed with you most from today's video. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Because sometimes, one sincere perspective can become a light for someone else who is walking through the very journey you have already lived. And before you go, carry this one thing with you. You do not need to become a different version of yourself to find peace. You only need the courage to meet again the person you truly are, the one you forgot long ago.